Hello, everyone. Charles Watts here. Welcome back to Inside Arsenal. It is Friday. Yes, I know this is the second time that I have been on here today, but Mikel has just had his pre-match press conference ahead of the game against Bournemouth at the weekend. So I thought I'd pop back on, go over some of the big talking points that he brought up in that press conference. Was some interesting bits and pieces about Saliba and his future, about Max Dowman, about Martin Odegaard, injury news, team news, Kai Havertz returning. So plenty of interesting bits and pieces from him. Also had a little bit of an update on Ousmane Dembele, who, of course, we were talking about in this morning show with that injury issue he suffered against Arsenal. PSG have now released a statement ahead of his potential involvement in the second leg. So we'll go over that as well before we wrap this one up for today. But we'll start with some of the big talking points from Mikel's press conference, which he just had at London Colney. Well, I say just had. He had about an hour ago at London Colney. And here are the big talking points. Probably the biggest thing to come from it is Kai Havertz is very, very close to a return. We knew that Mikel and Arsenal were hoping he might be able to play some part in the season. Still, I think we all kind of assumed that would be the Champions League final if Arsenal got there. But judging by what Mikel Arteta had to say today, it could well be before that. So we'll go over some of the big talking, some of the sort of team news updates he had to say. So on the fitness of Calafiori and Jorginho, not such good news. He said Calafiori is out, Jorginho is still out. Jorginho's was a bit more complicated than expected. Thankfully, he's fine. He's feeling good. He's recovering well. But yeah, it was a bit more than what we wanted. I'll leave it to the doctor if he wants to clarify or judge that. If Jorginho could play again this season, he says, I think so, yeah. Hopefully, if everything goes well in the next week or so, I think he will gradually integrate in the team. Now, we know this was a rib injury that Jorginho suffered. And at the time, I did wonder if there was some, potentially a punctured lung involved in this. And Sammy Mockbell, now at the BBC. I keep saying, whenever I say Sammy's name, I always link him to the Daily Mail. But of course, he has now gone to the BBC. And sources indicating to Sammy in a report that he's put out that it was a punctured lung that Jorginho suffered in that game against, it was Brentford, wasn't he? When he sort of rolled over the challenge high in the air, landed down on the ground, sort of tried to get up and recover. But you could see he was really, really struggling in real pain with his ribs sort of area. And yeah, Sammy's reporting that it was definitely, according to sources close to him, a punctured lung for Jorginho. So obviously that was very, very serious. But it looks like he might play again this season, which means he might play again for Arsenal because we know he'll be going at the end of the season. But then on Kai Havertz, now this was really interesting, I thought, when asked if he could be back before the end of the season, he said, I think so. I think if everything goes the way it's going at the moment and the way it's planned, I think he will have a chance to play a few games in the season. Now, Arsenal have only got 5 games potentially left this season, hopefully 6, but definitely 5 in the Champions League semi-final, where you got Bournemouth this weekend, then you got the Champions League semi-final second leg, then you got Liverpool, Newcastle, and then Southampton. And that's it. And hopefully if Arsenal get through PSG, obviously you'll have the final against either Barcelona or Inter Milan. So for Mikel to say hopefully he's got a chance of playing a few games this season, you're kind of thinking, what, next weekend, maybe? Are we going to see Kai Havertz in training next week? Potentially so. I mean, that would be a big boost for Arsenal, no doubt about it, to have him back. I mean, unfortunately, it's going to be it could well be a little bit sort of too late for anything. Hopefully not. As I said, if Arsenal get through, if they can manage to turn things around in Paris, then you've got a few games for Havertz to get ready for the Champions League final. That'd be a massive boost for Arsenal because Kai Havertz is incredibly important to this team, as we've seen. So, yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Not really expecting that from Mikel. So that's good news. I imagine we're going to see pictures of him training pretty soon. For Mikel to be confident enough to say that, he's got to be virtually on the grass now with, in terms of sort of full contact training. So we'll see on that. But good news, not so much great news on Calafiori. We were hoping to have him back a while back and he's still not fit. So that's a shame. Jorginho, hopefully he'll be back soon. Important thing with Jorginho is he's recovering from such a serious injury. But yeah, really good news on Kai Havertz. Fingers crossed we might well be seeing him back in an Arsenal shirt very, very quickly indeed. So Martin Odegaard was brought up. Tom Canton asked Mikel about this one and about why he thinks maybe Martin hasn't been able to sort of reproduce the form this season that he had shown in the previous couple. And this is what Mikel had to say. He said there were many factors, I think. Obviously, the injury, the long-term injury, it doesn't help you. And the consistency and the platform to continue in the season, it's very difficult. The level of consistency he's shown is unbelievable for an attacking player to be constantly there. It's very rare because there are always ups and downs, especially the players that are very creative and they rely on a spark and creating moments in games. But there are other aspects of his game that remain intact, and he continues to do it every week. And I was kind of talking about that today, isn't it, in terms of how important Odegaard is when he's not creating. He still plays an important part in his team because he's a guy who kind of leads a press and does all that sort of stuff. Obviously, that's not enough. That's not what he's in the team purely to do. If Martin Odegaard's in the team, you want him to create, you want him to score goals, you want to set goals up. When that's not happening, then it's an issue because he's Arsenal's main creator to do that sort of stuff. But yeah, that was what he had to say. Tom then asked him about, sort of talked about Fabio Vieira going and whether there's maybe enough strength in depth in the attacking midfield position to be able to maybe, well, he didn't specifically say sort of rotate Odegaard out when he's not in form, but that was a kind of general theme of question. Was there enough in that attacking midfield position to be able to sort of cope with if someone's out of form or not? And Mikel said we have a lot of options there. Mikel Merino can play in that position. Declan, we have Ethan there, and that's his main position. We have players that can play in that position. We have Max as coming up as well very soon. And so I think we're in a good position. So that was interesting. He name dropped there Max Dowman, who we know is still 15 years old. He can't play at the moment in this Arsenal team. That will change. He'll be available from next season onwards. Regulations stopping him playing at the moment because of his age and the year group he was registered in at the start of the season. But that goes out the window once the summer rolls around and the new seasons begin. And the fact that he's name dropped him there, and we see Max training with the team all the time. The fact that he's name dropped him there, suggests that next season, it is very much being earmarked for a first team player. Not regularly, you imagine, not going to be week in, week out, but we might well be seeing more of Max Dowman. I think that kind of has to happen, to be honest. Sometimes you do get these talents that are just that good that you need to drip feeding him maybe earlier than you would other players. And when you've got a talent of Max Dowman's, what looks like his ability anyway, is you've got to sort of utilize that. And also, obviously, you want to keep him at the club because you've got all the vultures circling, trying to lure him away at the moment. So if you're going to, you need to show that there is a pathway there and he can play first team football, be in and around the first team squad. And then Simon at the Standard sort of went back to that later on in a press conference and said, you name dropped Max then. So is he going to be a part of your plans when you're planning for next season? And Mikel said, for the near future, yes, let's see how it all evolves. But we certainly have a big talent there. So, music to Max Dowman's ears, I'm sure, when he's sitting at home and he's sort of watching Sky Sports News or whatever, and suddenly the press conference pops up and you got Mikel Arteta talking about him in the press conference. That'll give him a real sort of confidence boost. Again, I'm sure if there are any sort of whatever stage the contract sort of talks are at the moment with him, his family, his representatives, you got Mikel speaking like that, so glowingly, so openly in a press conference, that's going to help in terms of saying, look, this is the plan. We very much have him penciled in to make his return. So, I mean, look, Arsenal don't want to be relying on a 16-year-old next season. You're relying on a player that young, then you're in serious trouble. It shouldn't be the case. But yeah, I did think it was interesting nonetheless on that. On William Saliba, this is what Mikel had to say. This was James Ollie who asked about this, and he was talking about sort of the way he put it to Mikel was like, we know all about Real Madrid and how it all works. We saw it with the remontada, how that was all drummed up by the media ahead of the Arsenal game. He said, but they also kind of work like that when it comes to transfers. And, we're seeing it with Saliba. The sort of typical Real Madrid wheels seem to be being set in motion at the moment, how they operate and how they go about sort of landing their targets. And James was like, can you put that, sort of nip it in the bud right now and say that, this summer, William Saliba, won't be going anywhere and staying at Arsenal? And Mikel was like, those kind of things are more for Andrea and the club to talk about. I love when he says that, Mikel, because the club and Andrea don't talk. You can't, he always says it about, you should talk to the doctor. He'll say more than that. We said we don't get the opportunity to talk to the doctor. The doctor doesn't do press conferences. Andrea Berta doesn't do press conferences. The club don't, go and put things out when you go and ask them. It doesn't really work like that. So it's such a stock answer from him that we can't actually do. And he obviously knows that as well. But he says those kind of things are more for Andrea and the club to talk about. What I'm certain is because I had the conversation with him, is that he is so happy here, that he wants to continue with us, and what will happen in the future with our negotiations and things that have to take time and process and be on top of that. But I'm quite confident that William is very happy here, and that's the place he wants to be. So interesting again there. I thought that Mikel's sort of revealing that he has gone and spoken to William Saliba about potentially his future and how things are sort of panning out, and maybe the speculation and what's going on with contract talks and stuff like that. And William Saliba very much reiterating to Mikel Arteta that he is happy here, which will be music to Arsenal fans' ears. But ultimately, he needs to sign a contract, because the longer this goes on, the more we start to hear the inevitable stuff that we're already hearing, as James Ollie pointed out when he asked the question about how Real Madrid operate and how they do these transfers and how they get sort of behind the scenes and unsettle players and get in their ear, like we've seen with Trent and so many other players. It's not a comfortable position to be in if you're the club that owns that player, because you kind of know how it always ends up panning out. And Arsenal want to avoid that. So if you get Saliba done early, nip it in the bud, it would be just such an absolute boost for everyone. But that's what Mikel had to say on that. And now sort of turning our attentions quickly to Ousmane Dembele. Mikel was speaking. PSG have been putting out a statement on him. Obviously, he missed training the last couple of days since the Arsenal game. He's not going to be involved in the game this weekend for PSG in the French league. And now PSG have released a statement which said Ousmane strained his right hamstring. His condition is progressing well. A further assessment will be carried out shortly. So not exactly, a detailed statement from PSG, but a statement nonetheless confirming that he has suffered a hamstring strain. Now, tend to be, if you've done your hamstring, or even if you just strained your hamstring, you're looking at a couple of weeks out there. Because the last thing you would want to do if you a player like Dembele, if you strain your hamstring, is to put him out when he's not quite ready, because you got a real chance of it then going completely. And if that happens, then you're out for the season, you're out for the Champions League final. If you get there, now obviously Wednesday night is a huge game for PSG, and you want your best players playing in that, so they might be a little bit more open to him playing with an injury than they normally would be. But we'll have to wait and see. Maybe it's all mind games as well from PSG ahead of that game against Arsenal, just getting in Arsenal's heads, thinking that Dembele could be out. We know Mikel Arteta uses that against oppositions at times, that sort of tactic, and they could well be doing that as well. But that was their statement. So we'll find out maybe from them what happens with the further assessment that they say will be carried out shortly on Ousmane Dembele. But that was about it from Mikel's press conference today. There are a few other sort of bits and pieces in that he spoke about. Obviously, he spoke about sort of PSG and how they got to focus on Bournemouth. He was very glowing in his praise of Bournemouth and the way they play football as well. We'll go over tomorrow morning show the sort of predicted 11 that we'll choose for that game. Look at more closely at what Arteta has said about them, about their coach as well. If you want to get involved in that, you want to sort of give me the predicted 11, the 11s that you would play against Bournemouth, or you would like to see Arteta play, then get down into the comments below. Give me those 11s and I'll pull some of them together and get them included in the show in the morning. But until then, that's it from me, everyone. Thank you for joining me once again on a Friday. Enjoy the start of your weekend, and I'll speak to you very, very soon. Bye-bye.